As scenic design, it was my job to consider the color palette while also considering what locations we'll be using, the coast, village, and the castle. When designing the village, I considered how many people we had, how much money we had, and that deeply affected what color palettes and how I designed the village. I considered a more earth tone color. In a way, it can be seen as beautiful. The dark browns are from the ground and from the earth, and the lighter tones are from the houses. When Zander is taken by the king into his castle, this is truly Zander's lowest point. It's going to be very dark, but at the same time have a mixture of oranges and light browns. The coast represents a new beginning, if you will. The blues from the water are almost pure, and they contrast with the oranges, but in a nice way that represents balance. When designing the village, I considered all of the houses and tiki huts over to the left-hand side, and it was very crowded and condensed. There was possibly a marketplace to the right-hand side, and behind the marketplace was a field. Our castle is grand and huge. Zander's statue, however, is quite smaller. It's closer to the size of a human, but it sits right in the middle. These are all the things I've considered as a scenic designer. I designed the locations, I considered the color palettes, and I considered the order in which these locations come into play.
Hello, I'm Sarah Hagerman. I was the costume designer for Zander. So the main points of the costume design is the protagonist and antagonist are almost staying the same. Then there's the villagers who are doing the arc of the story and clothing. So that reflects in the color palette that I chose. So there's grays in the beginning, and then in the middle there's pops of browns, blues, dark greens, and then in the end it's just all bright palettes. So very rich in reds, oranges, and yellows. In the beginning of the story, the costume design is inspired from the Great Depression, so very dirty looking clothing, very worn and torn. And in the end of the story, it's kind of bohemian and Polynesian dress, so very neon almost looking colors. The protagonist, Zander's color palette is very manly. I wanted him to be almost in rich earth tones. And then the costume design is from the Arabian kind of traditional designs. I really liked the costume design in Lawrence in Arabia, so I kind of went with that and put in the colors that he would be wearing would kind of look out of place from the villagers. Then there's the king. His color palette is very gemstone-like. I wanted him to look out of place and out of touch for the villagers, and so the costume design reflects that as well. Very rich earth, very rich fabrics like velvet and stuff like that. So I took inspiration from Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and also Game of Thrones Joffrey's character. And then the King's Court's color palette is kind of a mix match between the beginning and end of the villagers' color palette. I kind of wanted them to be mixture because the people are from the village, but they are wearing the clothes and the colors that the king would like to be in his favor.
My name is Amy Cable, and I would be doing the lighting for Zander's story. I would begin the story at the castle being very dull and gloomy, projecting that it is an unhappy place to live, with lots of dark skies, and the only light that is being seen would be from the castle. Some light would be glowing through the fog and mist. In the castle interior, I would use very gothic, warm, glowing candle lighting to show that it is mysterious, as there is a lot of black left in the room that hasn't been lit to be left to the audience's imagination. When the hero enters the story, I would clear the clouds so that there is a strong beam of light coming down, shining upon the hero to show that the grey skies clear, to symbolize that the darkness will be cleared by the hero. In the rebellion scenes, I would use a grey cloudy sky with a warm fire from underneath to reflect the chaos of the battle. Having just a plain grey sky doesn't suggest anything to the audience about who will win the battle. The ending of the narrative is set at the coastal port I would use a lot more light in these scenes to show that the sun is shining, to project that all of the citizens are happier.
Hi, my name is Brooke Fay, and I am the sound designer for this project. Here I'm going to focus on all the different sounds for our story, including ambient sounds, music, and 2 of the more pivotal scenes in our story. Our story takes place on the coast right next to the ocean, so it's important that we include some ambient background noises to emphasize this setting, such as the sounds of waves crashing, seagulls, wind, and sailboats. And because of the large population of our village, I also want to include people oftentimes talking in the background. The music for our story is going to be very important in setting the tone for our characters. Just a few examples here. During shots of our village, I imagine slow, sort of somber music to emphasize the poverty and suffering of our villagers. But in contrast to this, when Zander enters the story, the music will be a more upbeat and hopeful tone. During the climax, I'm hoping for an epic sort of battle music, because this is where we really want our viewers on the edge of their seats, as it is the main turning point in the film. And then we want the end of our story to be a hopeful, upbeat tone again, as Zander leaves the village and the villagers have a new perspective for their future. So, to get a little more specific with one of the scenes here, for Zander's entrance, the sound of his iconic shovel being dragged across the gravel. Finally, the battle scene between Zander and the king is the climax for our stories. Grunts and groans, sounds of pain. And finally, the stabbing sound.